I'm Sam Sifton. I'm the food editor of the New York Times. One of the great things about being a journalist at the New York Times is that we switch beats all the time. So I have done a lot of food. I came as a food editor and writer. I became the restaurant critic. I also worked on the culture desk, running our arts coverage, and on the national desk, running our national news report across the United States. And it always makes me, I did a lot of travel in that job, and it always makes me laugh when I think that luxury, to me, as a reporter, always meant that I could park the car directly in front of the room where I was staying. So it's lovely to be here. We heard a lot of very cheery news this morning about the state of luxury travel here in Asia and elsewhere. And it got me to thinking, if you look at the New York Times, if you read the New York Times this morning, there's some storm clouds out there. There's some storm clouds that are gathered over particular parts of the globe. There are worries about our geopolitical situation, economic instability, both in our own country, in New York, in the United States, and abroad. The specter of terrorism looms. And I wondered, for this next panel, if we could talk a little bit about the global context that sits behind and around all of our thinking about luxury travel. So I'm joined today by three men with varying aspects on this subject, who I hope will deliver a great discussion about this very topic. So we shall begin with Pedro Rebela de Sousa. Pedro, you want to come on up? The managing partner of SRS Advogados. We will follow him with James McBride, who's the managing partner of Nihai Resorts and Birch Creative Capital, and not for nothing, folks, the 2016 Independent Hotelier of the Year, just announced by Hotels Magazine. And Lionel Ohayon, the founder and CEO of iCrave. I urge you to look at his credits in your books. They are legion, but suffice it to say, if you felt comfortable in an airport, probably his work. You heard my pitch. James, tell us, what do we know about the geopolitical situation and how it's affecting resort business?
I think it is affecting politics, Zika, Donald Trump, many things that are on people's minds. And I think, but geographically, I think it's a geographic issue. I don't think it affects the whole world. It's on people's minds. And I think that destinations and places that people will go will be adjusted accordingly. You know, less people are going to France for obvious reasons, more going to England. People weren't going to Brazil because of Zika, not because of so much geopolitical, but because of the disease. And I think that the human mind is a key driver in deciding that, location-wise. And I think to a certain degree the media is the friend and the enemy in these things, especially in, let's say, Zika's case, of where it pushed it to such a degree where there were places that there was no Zika. And as it was a sensational story, it gained momentum and people may or may not have gone. But I think in a nutshell, there are problems, there are clouds ahead. I agree with you, Sam. But most importantly, I think it's the luxury consumer is very wise and can make decisions on their own and will take risks on their own to do what they think is right.
Pedro, you've made the point that to understand where we're at right now, we need to understand, as we heard earlier this morning, the millennial market. Can you expand on that a little?
Well, yeah. As one can tell, we have different professional realities. You see, the only guy that wears a tie, it's me. Look at him, much fashionable, and him in jeans. So it's I have obviously a very, very specific approach, which is basically based on my professional experience and also obviously of trying to be a traveler too. You know, the context where I actually see the world is, you know, everything has a new paradigm. You know, if we look, we have new players, You go to the financial world. I worked for over 20 years, and you don't see. You see the 10 largest banks are no longer American, English, or German. You have 4 Chinese, just to give you an example. You have 1 Spanish. So the world has changed. You have new centralities. The center. You have obviously new concerns, you were saying. New concerns about the new paradigm of energy, the new paradigm of politics. Democracy is.
And to interrupt you, a paradigm of safety. We saw in Amrita's slide earlier that it was over 50% take safety into concern as they're making their travel decisions. Lionel, you thought about this a great deal. Can you talk a little bit about the intersection of design and safety, if that's the right overlap?
So, the first time we got involved in thinking about that was probably in 2007 when we did the JetBlue terminal in New York. And JetBlue, what was happening at that time, what's so interesting is that JetBlue was telling customers, we're not feeding you on the plane, so get here early and eat. And TSA, post 9/11, was saying, you got to get here an hour in advance, right? So we had the situation where we had a lot of people getting to the airport early and they needed food and they needed to sort of have a new experience. And so we're really in the space of understanding how our digital and physical worlds intersect to create these new experiences. And what we learned was, in order to really understand what the problem that we were solving for was we learned that what we were really designing for is managing people's anxiety, right? Because really what's happened is that there's this tremendous anxiety that's built around flying, right? And there's this terrible kind of moment of going through airports, and if we figured out that if we can design and manage people's anxiety, then we can figure out what the airport needs to be, what it needs to look like. So that's how we sort of got, if anyone's traveled through the United States or Canada and ordered food on an iPad at your gate, and the food gets delivered right to your gate, that's born directly out of the question. There's a lot of people who need to go to their gate, they want to sit at their gate, they might have 3 hours before their plane takes off, but there's this kind of like understanding of how you do it. And so we said, well, how do we solve for getting people to order food at the gate, right? And start to look at the different experiences in airports in terms of the level of anxiety. So for us, that's now developed, that was 2007, dramatic changes are happening in travel with respect to how you get to the airport, whether your bag will be with you or not, right? And then understanding what the opportunities are for that experience in the airport, and thinking of the airport as a destination in and of itself, as opposed to this necessary stop on your way to your destination, is really part of this sort of luxury travel ideal. You're seeing it here at Changi, you're seeing it all over the world, where people understand that you really have to, what we're doing is really designing, in the design world today, what we're doing, a lot of companies like ours, is really just designing experience, right? And understanding that that experience probably starts when someone's on the couch and says, hey, what do you think? Should we go to Japan this year? The first thing you do is you have a digital interface with Japan, right? So you probably go online and you click and you figure it out. So not understanding how those two things collide is a giant miss. And then you say, okay, well, that's a starting point. What are all the touch points in between? So that this kind of understanding of luxury, I mean, we're opening a hotel in Amsterdam next month, and it's the same thing. It's really millennial driven. It's really trying to understand that beginning to end sort of
right, which is something that I've talked about with Pedro before as well. That there used to be this notion that there was the sort of pre-planning the trip itself and then the debrief, and that seems entirely gone.
It ties in what you're saying about millennials and the new generation, which actually also has changed completely the paradigm. But on security, just a note, which is quite curious. I'm based in Portugal. It's a very small country. The tourism and the luxury tourist has increased dramatically because of what? Security. All the North African countries, say Tunisia, Egypt, and obviously are a no choice. So immediately what happened, there was a transfer of North European, South European, all over, the people from the States moving, instead of moving into that region, move to Greece, moving into Portugal. So it's interesting how security actually plays a role On the millennials, what we discussed before is, when you think about millennials, and the world has changed because, when you look into this industry, you have clearly a matrix where you have the people that have and the people that have not, the people that really want status, and the guys that don't need the status. And when people generally, the Cristiano Ronaldo, if you have to mention someone that actually is Portuguese, is a guy that likes to have status. So he tries to move on the other direction. And this was pretty much straightforward. For the millennials, this is not the reality. They don't care, actually. As one could see, and obviously the choices that we are just chatting, the choices that were mentioned for Asia, I don't think are necessarily the same for Europe, for sure, and possibly for the States. Say, for instance, shopping. The millennials, they like to shop, but much...
Well, James, they're not going to your hotel to shop, right? They're not going to your hotel to shop.
No, for sure.
But I wonder, do they go for status? In other words, what is the connection between an experience, an adventure experience, and status? Is there one?
There is, and I think I'm living that as we speak. As NYT is a resort on the island of Sumba, which Sumba's 2.5. Just for some context, because 4 years ago I'd never heard of Sumba, and I'm sure
who knows where it is?
Good.
Oh, it's pretty good. 4 years ago, none of you knew where it was.
Maybe 4 minutes ago. So Sumba's 2.5 times the size of Bali. It's a huge landmass. It's the only resort on the island. And I think just in the evolution of building NYT, it had a cult following, mostly because of the private surf wave and people coming and really going there for surfing. And I think as notoriety grew, #1 in the world in travel and leisure this year, that's where you started to have the interface of where it's the place to go, colliding with people that go there for the pure reasons of visiting Sumba, involving themselves in the Sumba Foundation, and going for the true purpose of the travel of what it is. And in many cases, not a good thing, because the two worlds, they don't really go together. Right. And to your point, there are no shops, there are no restaurants, and the mind of the wealthy consumer, the millennial, can't dissect the point that you could have a business that is in an area that there's nothing. It doesn't add up. How could that be the #1 hotel that people are going to that doesn't have all of the amenities that they are used to? It's something that sort of, it collides.
So Lionel, let me ask you a brand question now. I told you I was going to ask you about airports, but now I want to ask you about brands. It's really noticeable to me that, so skiing now is where all these Singaporeans want to go skiing, all these North Americans or Northern Europeans want to go surfing. We want what we don't have. And that sends a message of luxury or of status. How is that communicated now in this new world that we live in?
I think the idea of luxury itself, and we talk about millennials, which I think is a little bit dangerous because really it's a much broader swath of people. And when you talk about people playing video games, it's not 18-year-olds, it's 45-year-olds, right? And so this kind of notion of millennials is really this bigger, broader group. And the very idea of luxury today for, let's call it millennial, but thinking about the broader group, is having everything you want without guilt, right?
So actually, let's define that group. So it's not 18 to 34. You're going 18 to 45?
Yeah.
Can we go a little higher? I like video games, just a little higher.
Yeah.
And luxury without guilt, and I think is a key factor of our success too. You're spending a lot of money. As I mentioned, you have people coming from 7 to 11 nights, but because they can genuinely engage themselves with the people, and it's not skin deep. I think where there are a lot of mistakes.
So let's be straight about what skin deep is. You were quite forceful on the issue of ecotourism and what that means against a high price point.
Ecotourism is BS.
Okay.
Ecotourism is
That's
something...
a tweet, by the way.
Ecotourism
is BS. James McBride, #luxury travel.
Yeah, well, the only reason I say that, maybe Donald will tweet it. No, the only reason I say that, I think it's so loosely used, ecotourism. We eco. Eco is a cheap way, inexpensive way for you not to change your sheets. and not have towels and maybe not have hot water. So, I stayed at a place in Nicaragua because I've been looking at new sites all over the world, and I stayed at an eco place. It was like $700 a night. Even the fan didn't go fast. And I was sitting there at night and I'm like, they're really pushing it. There's just a fan, there's no air conditioning, and the fan was sort of about 5 revolutions a minute. So with jet lag, you're looking at it, and then there's no windows, there's just sort of areas so the bugs don't come in, one towel, sheets, and I'm like, you know what, this clearly doesn't work. And I don't care who you are, no one wants to pay money for that. You want it to be responsible, it's got to be done right, and it just can't be over and over used because it's not sensible. And people are going to grab onto that and understand that. And people spending a lot of money want to take a shower, they want to have sheets. Yes, those sheets don't have to be changed every day, but there's a logical way of doing it. And many people are just, they're saying it because they think they can get away with it. They're saying they're philanthropic, and they give no money, or they give a little bit, and it's just all a little bit of a hoax.
Lionel, you jumping in there?
I think it's fair to say that that's true in terms of how people have jumped on the bandwagon and said we're an ecotourism establishment. But the reality is that young people really want. You have a double-edged sword in winning that award because now it's like, are you going to have the same cult following that's coming after it? And that kind of notion of Tulum's a great example. Unbelievable beach, great little getaway, off the grid. Within 5-10 years, the place has completely exploded. It's like the secret's out. I think the New York Times, was that you who did that article on Heartwood?
We did the article on Heartwood. We do a story on Tulum every 13 days.
Okay,
actually, it's a New York Times.
And now, people don't realize it, but there's nowhere for all the sewage to go, and people are living in it, and it's a mess. It's a disaster. So it's kind of like this idea that people actually want to get off grid is real. The idea that people want to go and find an experience that is transformative is a real thing.
So, Pedro, I just want to ask you a question here off of that, which is that as we look at a world where, on the one hand, there's increasing kind of homogenization or at least mergerization of luxury chains, right, both in airlines and in hotels, and then we have this desire to have off-grid experiences. As an M&A guy, where does that put you?
Oh, it puts you, it's very interesting, your question, because it goes exactly, the M&A is being driven, I believe, and will be driven by millennials. They will be driving, it's not us. Now, we started somehow, and then the Starwood was a starting point and all that, but these will create, I just wanted to say something, when we define these sort of millennials, we are talking about people that in LinkedIn, they are 45% have an MBA. At least 1 quarter US, they make over $1 million, $500,000 in terms of on a yearly basis. So they are getting there. And so what I believe is that the structure of the industry has to change in the sense that M&A will be driven by their wishes. I think about an example. My youngest son, he stays in 5-star hotel, and he actually cultivates one thing that we haven't mentioned, which is bleisure. The bleisure is business leisure. So if you go on a business trip and then you have a resort like the one James has, what you do is you combine one trip with the other. And then these will imply that groups, hotel groups, have to look into that and understand that, number one, the M&A is not driven only by dimension and vertical offer, is also driven by the capacity that in terms of distribution, in terms of transportation, and in terms of hotels, have sort of local M&As that actually were already mentioned before.
I have a thought. I'm working on a project in Utah on Powder Mountain where a group of 4 young millennials got together, met a young venture capitalist, and bought the biggest ski area in North America. And the reason they bought this area is because they have a group called Summit Series where they've connected all these people together, these young entrepreneurs, philanthropists, people who actually want to live a life differently. And they bought the mountain and went and raised money, and then they're trying to figure out how they actually, now that they've sort of woke up at 30 years old and said, oh my God, we have to actually build a town, right? What is a town? What is the experience of the town? What kind of things are people going to do here? How are we going to run it? How's its governance? All that stuff is an experience that we're actually building with them. But the most interesting thing you're thinking about M&A is they're going to end up crowdfunding this entire build, right? So if they start looking at it completely different than going through the regular, acquisition costs and getting banks involved and saying, well, we have 10,000 people or 15,000 people, probably 20 by now. Maybe each one of them wants to give us $10,000, right? We'll raise $100 million in a minute, and we'll get the show on the road. And they're really defining their world entirely, even how the money is raised, sourced, and the governance and what's going to happen up there.
It's pretty interesting and this goes to something that James and I were talking about yesterday, which is that this is a business model that is dependent on passion, yes? Yeah. And not on convincing a bank that you have the collateral to do the deal. And that very much influenced the building of your resort.
Pardon me.
Passion, I think just in the amalgamation of all the brands, whether it be Accor, Marriott, Starwood, etc., the world is just becoming a very vanilla place. And the success of a lot of those hotels within these big umbrellas often comes down to the leader that you have running that specific business and the passion of that person. So while you have a good channel for delivering reservations through these companies, if you don't have a great leader who understands the dynamic, understands social media, people, and all of the things that are needed, you can have a mediocre experience and it's just going to be vanilla. And I think taking that to individual hotels and on the entrepreneurial side, passion is the key, but passion when you want to do a new development, the next development, which Chris Birch financed and was an amazing partner in everything that we did in NYT, and a lot of its success is because of that and having the capital to do it. If you don't have a management company, you don't have all these things, you can't raise the finance. If you're passionate to the bank or you're passionate to someone, they're not going to give you the money, but through crowdsourcing and all of these things, which I think makes unbelievable sense and is going to get bigger and bigger and bigger because people still believe in passion, and passion does win and deliver results.
So there's not a lot of passion in my staying at the Red Roof Inn in Bismarck, North Dakota. So it occurs to me that maybe I should stop asking questions and you should start asking questions.
So I work with National Geographic, Destination, and Condé Nast Traveler. And I hate to say this, but as you know, I stayed at your resort, and TNL have actually got it spot on. It's an absolutely fabulous resort. Saying that, you said that ecotourism or eco-resort is BS.
Yeah.
So how would you define your resort?
I would say, let me say, backtrack a little. I just said that eco is used too loosely. And people say that things are eco when they're not. When they're not built with the right wood, they're not sensitive to what they're doing. And they are really misleading their audience, is what I'm saying with that. Because it's just easy to say you eco, and you eco because you don't change the sheets and towels and you let you take a shower in dripping water. So I define us as responsible. We are eco in every way, and everything we do is responsible in our design, how we treat our water, what we do with our electricity, and all of those things. We're completely organic. We provide our own fish, have gardens, etc. So it is all tied together in that way, but I would say the word responsibility is the key part. We are responsible to the people of Sumba. We are their guests. They are still tribesmen. They still wear swords. They still wear swords to work. And you have to be nice to them because they could cut your head off at any time. So buffalo is still their currency, and you have to be responsible all that to them in every way. And the other piece of that is your guests who enjoy that are very discerning in seeing what you're doing and love the piece that they can interact with the Sumbanese in this environment and are respectful to them, to what you've built and created in their environment, because Sumba is not our environment. It never will be. And the more that you are respectful to the people and to the land, it equates to what eco is in simple terms.
Pedro, we talked a little bit about M&A, then we went over into independent financing. Where would you put your money in the world right now?
That's a very good question,
Because
Things
take
are
notes,
moving
folks.
in a very, I would say that I would try to balance real estate. You know that there is a very strong Jewish roots in Portugal. So there was a rule that is 1/3 goes on the floor, 1/3 goes under, and 1/4 goes on air. So meaning cash, real estate, and and other assets like, commodities and other things. I would say that this time around, commodities are very volatile. So I would look into be cautious about cash. We also have to, now we could speculate, we don't know what's going to happen to the euro. We don't know exactly what how Brexit will impact in terms of the pound for sure, and about in terms of the euro. We don't know how Trump is going to impact overall, so it's very difficult to say. But I would say that I would bet in this industry because it's a lasting, and I really trust that combining leisure with millennials, you know what the future is going to look like. Irrespective of, I know we have wars, we have security problems, we have religion problems, we have all the extremisms, we have nationalisms growing everywhere, populism growing everywhere, which is even worse or as bad as. So,
but you are confident in the hotel industry.
I am totally, because
good.
as James was saying, I think that I define that is discover, desire, excellence, and extravagance. If you combine the four, that's what people are looking for.
That's what these guys do for a living. So I'll turn to you. Where on this earth? I know you both travel all the time looking for the next spot. Just between us girls, where is that next spot?
It's what we were saying before. It's like you're always afraid to say it because it's gone, right? The information moves so quick.
I think for me, a country that really is coming of age and very, very fast, that has been off the radar, is New Zealand. I think connectivity. I personally didn't know, that this is just my own ignorance, that to fly from New Zealand from Los Angeles is 12 and a half hours. There's a daily flight from Los Angeles and San Francisco to New Zealand, and the mind doesn't really correlate that New Zealand is that close. And the extraordinary beauty, it was just voted, actually knocked Singapore off their pedestal as the easiest place to do business in the world is now New Zealand, and on one of these polls. And I feel really, really big on that. I think
we're not trusting polls, though.
No, yeah, I guess so. And it's an amazing place. And I think the other one from its Portuguese roots that is also slowly coming of age, because it's an amazing place, is Mozambique.
It's a beautiful coast.
Mozambique, the coastline, it's just so huge. The connectivity, no jet lag from Europe, and the people are wonderful there. And I think there's some very good things to be happening there.
Come on, Lionel, give us your spot.
I really don't know. We have a 1-year-old, and we're like hiding from this mosquito, right? So
right.
Every time we look at where we're going to go, we don't know where we're going to go. That's why I'm all covered up in Singapore. Right?
Yeah.
But no, I actually think that there's so much happening in the mountains, wherever that might be. I'm seeing more and more projects and more of these kind of like places that are sort of like off the beaten path and looking to create their own kind of enclaves. I think
it's fascinating that that's occurring at exactly the moment that we're becoming aware as a globe of
rising
water and also global warming.
Yeah.
So skiing becomes all the more exclusive when we get delivered season after season of bad snow.
Totally.
What's sort of your favorite way to advertise your resort? Why should we come there?
What's the best way to tell a story of a hotel brand, of your hotel brand?
To communicate it?
Yeah.
It's been through social media. I think if you look at, you take out your phones, put in Nihiwatu, Nihiwatu, Instagram, please all do it now. A lot of you are on your phones already, so at least do some good work for me while you're at it. Thank you very much. It's been social media creating amazing content. When you've got a platform like Sumba, the Sumbanese people and the beaches and waterfalls and spa safaris, it just creates a movie that people want to join, and
that people will, and that's a story that your guests will tell themselves on social media.
They will, and it's reusing. Your guests are your proponent. I was interviewed on CNBC the other day, and it just said, "What are your thoughts about social media?" Because it's something I'm very passionate about, and the cost of it basically is zero. Our yoga teacher runs our Instagram and Facebook and everything, and it's all to do if you have people that have got taste. Understand how to hashtag, get the bloggers. It's the most powerful thing in the world. And Instagram for us through Facebook and all of these platforms has driven more business for us than anything, hands down, and word of mouth. Put those two together, you can create anything anywhere, and I think we've been able to show that in a place called Sumba, which, you know, a few years ago, nobody knew, including me.
I started this morning thinking that all I wanted to be was chief astronaut instructor. But now I'm thinking maybe the yoga instructor who's also the social media czar at Nihai Zumba might be. So I'm going to wrestle with that question over lunch with all of you. I'd like you all to give a big round of applause to these guys.
Good job, buddy.